It's June 7th, 1984 in Barneveld, Wisconsin. The day has had quite an eerie vibe, albeit calm despite the humid temperatures and blowing winds from the southwest. Down in the Great Plains, an ugly weather setup is in place with an unstable atmosphere, ripe for the creation of devastating tornadoes. Despite a tornado watch looming over their heads, no immediate threat prevents the folks of Barneveld from getting themselves to bed that Thursday evening, looking to wake up and finish the long work week almost behind them. But the week would end very abruptly in the very early morning hours to one of the most unexpected and devastating tornadoes in Wisconsin history, the Barneveld tornado. When it comes to describing Wisconsin's weather, many people from the US think of brutal cold and heavy snow being one of the main occurrences that happen in the state. However, if you ask a person from Barneveld, Wisconsin what the weather is like in their home state, they might also mention tornadoes. With being located quite far north in the United States, tornadoes may not be usually thought of happening much in Wisconsin, if ever much at all. But on June 8, 1984, a tragic EF5 tornado would defy the odds and ravage the small town of Barneveld, Wisconsin. Wisconsin, an upper Midwestern U.S. state, endures about 26 tornadoes on average per year, while Kansas, a Great Plains state, may face about 87 tornadoes yearly, a whopping 3.3 times more. Kansas does lie within the infamous Tornado Alley in the United States, which is a geographic region where warm, moist air from the Gulf of Mexico often slams into the cool, dry air from Canada, which creates an unstable atmospheric environment for tornadoes to develop. But Wisconsin lies just east of Tornado Alley. How did one of the most violent tornadoes in not just Wisconsin state history, but U.S. history, occur in such an unlikely place and leave an entire town almost entirely decimated? The very early morning hours of June 7, 1984 in the Great Plains began preparing the ingredients that were the genesis of the terrifying weather eventually arriving to Barneveld. Around 6 a.m. Central Time, a low-pressure system hovers over the borders of west central Kansas and Nebraska, continuing to travel northeast throughout the day. Warm, moist air from the southwestern United States and Mexico moves into the Great Plains, becoming heated up with the progressing hours of the day. A considerable area of moderate atmospheric instability stretching from northeastern Kansas to northern Minnesota possesses the region, with Barneveld sitting on the eastern precipice of this boundary. Vertical wind shear, or the difference between wind speed and direction between upper and lower air masses, increased as higher altitude winds blew from the west and southerly low altitude winds clashed, causing warm air to rise into the upper atmosphere, creating rotating supercells. As the day progressed into the afternoon hours, favorable storm conditions were brewing up in east central Nebraska and Kansas, prompting the National Weather Service to issue a tornado watch at noon Central Time. This began a tornado outbreak that would cause about 45 tornadoes to develop between approximately noon of June 7th through 2 a.m. of June 8th in 1984. A notable tornado that occurred before the behemoth Barneveld tornado was the Brooklyn, Missouri, Windham, Iowa EF4 that traveled an incredible 134 miles and ended the lives of 3 people, destroying farms and other small communities along the way. The most terrifying theme behind this EF4 and the ensuing Barneveld EF5 was the occurrence of these tornadoes after sunset, when tornado development usually stifles due to the cooling of the atmosphere. This EF4 would last for 3 hours between 7:55 p.m. and finally lift at 10:58 p.m. just southwest of Iowa City, Iowa. Thanks to the plentiful amount of warm, moist air well into the evening hours, the destructive atmosphere allowed for violent tornadoes to continue eastbound out of the Great Plains into the Midwest, with no sign of slowing down anytime soon. By 10:20 p.m. on June 7th, the National Weather Service out of Kansas City, Missouri, issued a tornado watch for eastern Iowa, northwest Illinois, and most notably, south central Wisconsin. The low-pressure system orchestrating the intense line of supercellular thunderstorms found its way into north-central Minnesota, perpetuating the warm air, moisture, wind shear, and atmospheric instability well into the dark of the night. By now, most of Barneveld, Wisconsin has gone to bed, getting ready to tackle another Friday before the weekend arrives. However, things began to turn for the worse. By 12:30 a.m. on June 8th, the first tornado touches down in Wisconsin, south of the small town of Belmont. This tornado would do EF2 damage, destroying a barn and uprooting trees. However, the unthinkable begins to happen with the storm. Just before reaching Mineral Point, the tornado will lift for a few miles until touching down again at 12:41 a.m., 5 miles southwest of Barneveld, only to develop into a quarter-mile EF5 monster. As the storm is approaching, many people in town are awoken to a gigantic clap of thunder, followed by a very brief, terrifying silence. Many people have lost power after this, and the sirens in Barneveld aren't able to go off to warn anybody what happens next. Just before 1 a.m., what is heard has been described as the sound of a jumbo jet about to crash land into the ground. Winds upwards of 200 to 300 miles per hour are ripping apart homes, picking up cars like toys, and stripping bark off of trees. Lightning strikes were so constant in this storm that weather spotters in Madison reported seeing a strobe effect illuminating the skies. A downtown local bar filled with people learn of the ensuing storm as someone runs inside and yells for everyone to take cover. In minutes, 90% of Barneveld is wiped from the face of the earth. A total of 93 households and 17 out of the 18 businesses in town are completely damaged, causing a whopping $25 million worth of destruction. Lofted debris, such as a gas canister from an auto shop, could be found as far away as Green Bay, about 170 miles to the northeast. 200 people, over a third the population of Barneveld, would suffer injuries from the tornado, and 9 people would tragically lose their lives. No tornado warning was issued by the National Weather Service during the tornado's rampage through Barneveld until after wind reports were sent in, largely thanks to the unconventional reflectivity shape seen on radar, which lacked the traditional hook echo that many radar-indicated tornadoes have, and most importantly, no weather spotters to report the tornado due to its occurrence at night. Because of the time it occurred, no footage or pictures of the Barneveld tornado have ever surfaced. This tornado arrived hidden by the cloak of the night, proceeded to kill the power to the sirens warning of its presence, and disintegrate a town before anybody had the chance to seek shelter, let alone process what was going on after a rude awakening. This makes the Barneveld tornado one of the most evil tornadoes to ever touch the ground. Despite the significant loss suffered, the folks from Barneveld knew they had to continue forward by working together to rebuild. 40 years later, Barneveld is a very warm, welcoming community, one of which I am very fond of as a resident of southwest Wisconsin. Much of my family is from this town, and relatives of mine were directly impacted by the severity of the Barneveld tornado likewise. June 8th is a date that remains in infamy amongst Barneveld residents to this day, a point of reference that some will use while telling a story from the past, like BC or AD for historians. Nobody thought a tornado would ever be able to climb the summit of West Blue Mound, the prominent bluff rising above the community due east of town. Despite the tornado achieving what many thought was impossible, Barneveld residents also achieved the same. They rebuilt their community again. 1,300 people and counting are making Barneveld their home, more than double that of the 540 residents who lived in the small town in 1984. Since June 8, 1984, there has only been one tornado that nearly reached Barneveld, which was a measly EF0 northwest of town on June 6, 2006, just 2 days before the 22nd anniversary of their infamous EF5. Barneveld has no correlation or nuance when it comes to dealing with tornadoes. By experiencing one, a person could safely watch from their porch, or one that rivals the deepest bowels of hell itself. While June 6, 2006, branded the numerical date of 666, it seems as though Barneveld already paid their debt back in full in 1984, sparing themselves from the devil's wrath for another day. It was as if the beast looked upon Barneveld with pity, and solemnly sighed a whimpering tornado that dissolved before cresting the northern boundary of town. Or maybe prayers escaped the tongues of the folks, and prompted God's hand to smite the storm into nothingness. Possibly even the will of Barneveld itself denied such another tragedy to occur. Regardless of one's beliefs or superstitions, Barneveld's story will live on for many years to come. And if a day returns to relive what was endured 40 years ago and counting, Barneveld will inevitably return again.